السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Brothers and sisters, before getting into the theme of the Khutbah today, I ask that we remember our brothers and sisters throughout this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad who may be suffering, may be in distress or misery, whether we know the cause of that suffering or not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran and through the Prophet Muhammad has emphasized for us how important the dua of the sincere believers is. And we should not ignore what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet Muhammad has said about dua, take advantage of the power, the strength that the individual and collective dua coming from sincere believers might have. The Prophet Muhammad was recorded as having said that whoever does dua to Allah, Allah fulfills his seeking. In exchange, he turns away misfortune until the dua is not related, unless the dua is related to sin or breaking some family relations. Brothers and sisters, there's perhaps no greater catastrophe, human catastrophe that is occurring on this planet than what is occurring right now in occupied Gaza. That there is nothing that we have seen in our collective lifetimes. We have read about, we've heard stories about, but we're actually seeing an ongoing genocide going on against the men, women, children, and babies of occupied Palestine, and specifically there in Gaza. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how many in the last few months have been slaughtered by this genocidal attack. Numbers range anywhere from 34,000 to 40,000. But what is to be understood that right now they're saying that at least 10,000 more bodies have been covered by the rubble of the buildings. People buried in rubble, they're living in apartments and houses. They're in hospitals that have been completely destroyed. So there's no exact number about how many of these defenseless people have been slaughtered during this ongoing genocide. And so I remind myself and remind you that if there's nothing else that we can do, if there's nothing that we can come up with, make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sustains the iman, the faith of these believers who are being slaughtered, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring a halt to the kind of just senseless butchering of men, women, children, and babies that we're seeing in Gaza today. Brothers and sisters, make dua for our brothers and sisters in Sudan. We've mentioned this a few times, but it seems that the issue is coming to such a head that over 1 million people are in northern Darfur in El Fasher. And they're surrounded by one of these contending two parties that are fighting over who's going to be the ruler over this nation. And 1 million people are surrounded in a way that they can't get out from the situation that they're in, with the likely prospect that a vast number of these individuals be killed, not because they are doing anything, but because they've been identified as supporting one of the parties who's contending for the leadership of the government. Brothers and sisters, if there's nothing that we can do to help not just these two situations, but anywhere where believers are being oppressed, are being slaughtered because of their belief, the least that we can do is to make dua and make, as the Prophet Muhammad has clarified, be clean as the best that we can in our own actions and behavior. It's not just a blanket statement from the Prophet Muhammad that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will answer our du'as individually and collectively. There is this responsibility that you and I have to do the best that we can humanly do in following what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has related to us in the Quran and preserve for us the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brothers and sisters, I'm not going to take much of your time today, but I want to put in some kind of context what we are looking at today in a large context, and then bring it back down to a smaller level that we can just see right in front of our eyes. The Prophet Muhammad has instructed us on every single Friday, every day of Jumah, that you and I should read the 18th surah of the Quran, Surah Al-Kahf. Every single Jumah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Prophet Muhammad has said that this ain't for people who get into the Khutbah necessarily. That is not for the person who's calling the adhan. It's not for the brothers and sisters who have special responsibility on the day of Jumah. Every single one of us on Yawmul Jumah are instructed by the Prophet Muhammad every week to read this surah. Brothers and sisters, is such a beautiful and enlightening surah. But one of the stories of the surah is very instructive for us as we are living in the times that we are living. You know, I hear, and I'm sure a lot of you hear very often, that you go to the masjid and all you see are just old men and old women. And it looks like it's a senior citizen's home, that it's like old people are having an activity on Friday in centers across the country. We are blessed here at this masjid that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings our youth into the masjid for Salatul Jumah. If they're not in school and can't get out of school, it's a blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us with young people who will carry on the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are having their hearts attached to the masjid to be one of those categories of people on Qiyamah. That when the heat of the sun, when it's so hot and people are standing in their own perspiration up to their ears, that the only shade that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow is the shade that He gives the different categories. And that one category is that youth, that young person, that male, that female whose heart was attached to the masjid, to the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at a young age, and then continued with this love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called them back to him. So when we read the Surah Al-Kahf, we read about the story of 7 individuals that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had been living in a time when their belief in the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not the state religion. The rulers over this area, and it's not specified in the Quran or Hadith literature, but the rulers, the specific area, but the rulers over the land were worshiping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they were insisting, they were enforcing that if you don't believe as we believe, you will be tormented, you will be persecuted. So these young folks, these young men, and there's tafsir about their situation. And many of the scholars and the writers of this tafsir said that all of these young men were sincere believers. They didn't concoct a plan that let's meet at a certain point, that we refuse to go along with the government is insisting. No, they randomly met. And when they began to ask one another, why are you here? Why aren't you down there with the people? They realized that all of them had left that town and gone up into the hills because they were refusing to bow down to the shirk that the leaders of the society were trying to impose upon them, to force them to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these young men recognize that the authority in the land is so powerful that there are even so few people who believe as we believe right now, that the only thing we can do is just abandon the society, leave it, go away from it. Most of the writers of tafsir about this situation say that these were believers, they were followers of Nabi Isa, the prophet Jesus. And that at this particular time where they were living, those who were in control of the society were not. You know the story. You read the story every single Friday. And so you know what was the outcome of the story. I'm not going to go through the details of the story, but it was an example of young people that didn't say anything about their parents being with them, their parents instructing them to go somewhere else. Because you don't believe like these people believe, and they're going to kill you, they're going to lock you up if you don't believe like that. No, this was young men having had the faith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put into their hearts to abandon everything and everybody. Why? For the sake of the protection of that deen, that belief that they had in their hearts, that they believe that we're going to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and nothing else is going to matter on that day. It's going to be, how did you believe? Not what role you played in the society. What did you believe? What did you practice? And these young boys just laughed and said, I'm out. I have to preserve my faith. I'm not going to stay around any longer. When we look throughout the Quran, we see the story of the young Ibrahim, who was bucking the society and bucking his own father, who was the maker of the idols that the people in the town where they lived worshiped. That he is a pillar of Iman, a pillar of faith, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us his story. That as a young man, he didn't wait until he had run wild and run crazy and just done anything he wanted to do as a blameless youth, as a youth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it in his heart firmly, the light of Iman. And we know the kind of response that his father and the people in that society that they gave to Ibrahim, his own father, who was the maker of the idols, his own father sanctioned having a pit dug and throwing firewood and everything flammable into it to make the fire blazing hot, so that when we catapult Ibrahim into the fire, he's roasted, he's done. We don't have to worry about him anymore. His own father sanctioned, he went along with this. Yes, my son is disrupting to society. Cast him, throw him, catapult him. They couldn't even get close, it was so burning hot. So catapult him into the flame. And what did this young boy, this young person, what did he do? He held to his faith. His own life was not more important to him than the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spared this young boy and allowed Ibrahim to be the father of these Abrahamic faiths and traditions. Brothers and sisters, briefly, look at the role of the courageous young people at the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Look at how they dealt with the situation in a society that was steeped in ignorance, that had fallen so low in their worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they would attribute Godhood to anything. Take a piece of wood, carve it any kind of way you want, let's worship this. Take a stone, chisel it any kind of way you want, and then just worship that. That they wouldn't go on a journey unless they had something that represented the shirk, the false god that they were worshiping. So they would travel these gods in worship. There's stories in the Surah literature that say many of the early Muslims in the early stages of the development of the Islamic movement, that many of them would sometimes have some idol. It's not the law. I'm not trying to slander the Sahaba in no kind of way. But I'm just saying that there was an evolutionary process. Everybody overnight didn't become the Sahaba that we're reading about, and that there were some Sahaba who may have a little idol in their sleeves while they're praying. That this was a society that was steeped in shirk, associating the partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That look at what so many of those young men and young women did. They provided the backbone, they provided the foundation upon which that first Islamic movement was built upon. Read the Surah literature. Read the stories of these young men and women. See how old they were when they made these sacrifices for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, following the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Read those stories. Be inspired by those stories. These were young people, maybe just like some of the young people sitting in this room now. Maybe it's like the age of your son or your daughter. Maybe they were like the age of your grandchildren, your grandson, or your granddaughter, the young people in this movement. Read about how in the early days of the movement in Mecca, when it became necessary for collective gatherings to listen to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, interpret not by language, but explain revelations that were coming down to him. When it became necessary that we can't just keep walking past each other talking, we need a place where we can come together and study and have the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam share this Quran as it was being revealed to him. And so at 17 or an 18-year-old, a young man by the name of Ak said that, came to the Prophet ﷺ. The Sirah tells us that he came to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and said, well, let's meet in my house. My house is behind these hills. Nobody's just going to walk past where I live. Let's meet in my house. This young man, 18, 17 years old, understood how important it was for him to sacrifice his own liberty or sacrifice his own safety by saying that the most hated movement, the most hated efforts that are going on, come meet in my house. This is a young man. This wasn't an old middle-aged and an old man. It wasn't an old woman. This was a young man in the earliest days of Islam who was taking this stand and taking this position. We know the story about Musab ibn Umair. We know that this is a young man, that his mother and father were rich, filthy rich. They had more money than they could ever spend in one lifetime. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they were mushriks, they were disbelievers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the light of Islam in this young man's heart. And his mother, when she found out that, you're so adamant, you're so much against Islam. Do you know that your own son, Musab, has turned his back on the faith of our ancestors? Right in your own house, your own son is following this man, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the mother tied him up, said, no, this is it for you. You're not going to hang around this so-called prophet of Allah. You're not going to be around him. You're not going to be around Umar and Mubarak and the rest of them. You're going to get tied up. And so Umair Musab was able to break free. And the Prophet Muhammad used him as the da'i. He was from, and his family was from Yathrib, from later the Medina. But the Prophet Muhammad used him to go back to Yathrib before the Hijrah and to spread the message of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Spread this message to everybody. And so after the first time that the people from Yathrib met with the Prophet Muhammad, it was just a handful, just a relative handful, no more than 15 people. And after the da'wah of this young man, the one who had defied his mother and his father and the people of Mecca, after his da'wah for just 1 year, the next year when they met, there were over 75 people from Yathrib who were coming to meet with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and pledging their allegiance to him, setting the groundwork for the Hijrah that you and I know all about. But I say all this to say that these were courageous young people, whether they took a stand against what their parents believed, if it were against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was revealing to the Prophet Muhammad, whether it was against the leaders of the society in which they lived, that they made a stand, they took a stand and emphasized that my life and my death is for the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All praises due to Allah. We praise Him, seek His assistance against the evils of His minds, and against the unsuccessfulness of our actions. Whomsoever Allah guides, no one can lead astray, and whomsoever Allah calls to action as a result of His or her wrong deeds, no one can lead aright. For Allah help those who help the religion of homeless or suffer encounters amongst them. O Allah, disappoint those who try to disgrace the religion of Muhammad and do not make it to those. Brothers and sisters, in closing, there can't be any one of us above ground right now in the United States that pay any kind of attention to what so many of the youth of America are doing today. That it would be hard for us to ignore. I'm not just talking about Muslim youth, but it would be hard for us to ignore and not know about that all across the United States and now is spreading across the world on campuses all over this earth, that these young students are taking a stance against the genocide that's going against the Palestinian people, the Palestinians, whether they're Muslim or not. In many of these encampments where the heavy hand is coming down, where law enforcement is being sick on these children, these young, I'm going to call them children, these young people, that law enforcement, like at Columbia University, they're attacking these young people as if they're creating some kind of violent environment. All they're doing is saying, you as a government have a responsibility. If you have any morality at all, you, Biden, you, this government, you have the ability to stop this genocide today. All you have to do is give the word and it will stop. But what does this president of this country, who years ago declared himself to be a Christian Zionist, what does he do? He continues to just procrastinate. He continues to just, well, we stretch it out just a little bit longer. I'm not saying this, making a political statement. I'm making just an objective statement about what the President of the United States is doing right now, this second, as we stand and sit here today. I had the opportunity at the beginning of the week to participate in what has been going on for 9 years now. It's called Muslim Advocacy Day. And this is one day out of the year when Muslims from all over the country send representatives to go meet with their congressmen and senators and to express to them the concerns of the Muslims in the constituencies that they represent. And this was a different kind of visiting period for the Muslims on Capitol Hill. Because in so many doors outside the offices, on the walls, there were signs saying, I support Israel. Right? Nobody's asking you that. Nobody's saying, will you support Ukraine? No one's asking you this, but in so many outside of their offices on Muslim Advocacy Day, they had signs up, let us know before we walk in there that you're wasting your time. What are you coming talking to me for? Can't you read? You can see who we support. Don't talk to me about genocide. Don't talk to me about anything like that. On this particular Muslim Advocacy Day, I haven't talked to a single Muslim who participated in this and said that they actually met with their congressman or senator. They wouldn't even, for the most part, even meet with the Muslims this year because there was a single issue on the agenda. We were not going there to talk about a lot of stuff. We were going there to talk about Gaza. We were going to talk about starting the genocide in Gaza. Brothers and sisters, what we are seeing happening with these young people, these young students today, all of us should be encouraged and happy about it. That I've seen so many interviews of young students at Columbia University. I saw a young lady yesterday, and the young lady was saying, Columbia University is a university in this country where people who leave our institution become the leaders of the U.S. government, that we probably have more graduates from this university than anywhere. And those students who are being trained and they're groomed to slot into government elected positions in the government, that they are showing the way. They are the ones that are saying that as long as this university is investing and keeps these investments going in this genocidal state of Israel, we are going to continue to protest against you. Brothers and sisters, this takes courage. This takes for people who may be going to school to be doctors, lawyers, all kinds of professions, all kinds of trainings. They're saying that that is not as important. Threaten me with expelling us. Threaten me, beat me, do whatever you think is necessary, but we're going to take a stand. And amongst those students, in those over 100 different colleges and universities, many of them are Muslim. And so it's encouraging to see that some of our Muslim fathers and some of our Muslim mothers, grandfathers and grandmothers are encouraging and supporting their children. Others, of course, you're about to graduate in 2 weeks, and now you're getting kicked out of school. Not only can you not come back next year during the summer, you can't come back to the university at all. This is how a foundation is laid and planted in the hearts of young people. Support our young people when they're taking positions that are built into this deen of heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has demanded all of us to take a stand on what's just, what is right. And these young people, these young Muslims who are taking a stand are following a divine command. And if your son, if your daughter is in a college or university, school is about out, but they'll be coming back in the fall. And if your son or daughter is in a situation like this, encourage them, support them. Do not discourage them for taking the actions that they're doing, because they are the ones, not just in these specific universities, but they are the ones who will be directing the policies that all of us, to some degree or another, will have to follow and be under the authority of these kinds of positions. Oh Allah, give us an understanding of this deen that is useful for us in this world and in the next. Oh Allah, put courage in our hearts and remove fear from our hearts so we can do that which is pleasing to you. And oh Allah, make not this ummah for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu an object of test for the disbelieving people. Brothers and sisters, I have a few quick announcements. And the first one is